Okay, welcome. My name is Wojtek again. I work as a staff scientist at National Institutes of Health. And together on stage with me is Ajit Lond. He is responsible for the release of Achilles 1 day ago, I believe, or a few days ago. He's a very big contributor as well, so all the credit goes to him pretty much for some of the development work. So let me get started. There will be two parts. I will talk about the Achilles tool in general, and then after we'll have some practical demonstration in that demo part. So this will be the lawyer style of talk, no slides, and I will actually try to stick to the vignettes and public examples and things like that, so that you can actually get to it yourself as well. Let me also try to do a show of hands. Who is confident in SQL in terms of inner and outer join? Raise your hand. Okay. And who would claim at least 20% expertise in R? Okay. So that's good to know. So I'll try to adjust. And who knows what Achilles result dist table is about? Okay. Or any background knowledge of Achilles? Raise your hand. Okay. But the dist table escapes you. That's good. That was a test question. So let me start. So Achilles heel is a tool which first starts with pre-computations, and then using these pre-computations, it is able to deliver two main outputs. One is visualization, or like data characterization and visualizing that. And the second output is Achilles heel, using these pre-computations to say, you have missing death data, for example, or the ratio males to females is odd. You have too many, all your subjects are females. So it's first does pre-computation, and then there's some checking on top of that pre-computations. In Achilles, or in the OHDSI network, we are now thinking of like extending that framework because there could be data quality inquiries which do not need to be pre-computed or are not at the same time good for data characterization. So there is now another avenue to check some of the other data quality, but the paradigm has always been pre-computation and then the quality checks. The main advantage of these, and let me just, since I mentioned pre-computation, I want to show you how you get to those pre-computations. So as we said, OHDSI is all about sharing things quite a lot. So if I want to see, by the way, Wojciech's talking about some pre-computations, what the hell those computations are. So I'm going to show them now. So there in the package, there are a bunch of code, there's a bunch of vignettes and stuff, but there is a knowledge base which even the package itself is using. So I'm cheating and showing you some of the inner guts of the package. So for example, an example of that computation could be distribution of age at first observation period. Or another example of the pre-computation would be number of providers. How many providers do you define in your data warehouse? And so I have to be scrolling left and right because GitHub doesn't do all this fancy thing. But at the bottom, you have to remember that this is a very wide table. So on the left, there is analysis ID, this little number to the right. Then there's the description, and then there's a bunch of things around each measure. But anyway, so I was talking about those pre-computations. So if you want to know what these pre-computations are, and there's 180 plus of them, so that is very important. So once, and also what is also important, the pre-computations take some substantial time. With the new multi-threading branch, they may take shorter. But be ready to, on a large server, CCAE, it can be 7+ hours to compute all of these pre-computations, depending on your server, obviously. If you have multi-threading, it may cut to much shorter. And or would you have an estimate?
2 hours.
2 hours, okay, but still 2 hours. It's not 2 minutes. So, and also a nice plugin. So Odyssey is using this framework for running SQL on all the different flavors. Achilles is an example of the most stretched use of this translation. The queries, the pre-computation queries can get quite complex, and making sure that they run on Google BigQuery and they run on Oracle, or at the same time they run on Redshift, could be a pain in the neck. So when you get those errors, please be understanding of the developers, because we are trying to code against like 6+ database schemas. That's actually part of the reason why I stopped developing some of those, because it's almost like this defensive SQL we have to write instead of what you would want to write. But actually, let me show another example.
Can we interrupt for just a second? So, standing in the back, it was very hard for me to see some of what's up here. And I just wanted to ask folks in the back row, how easy is it for you to follow along?
We magnify a little bit.
Magnify a little bit?
Okay, I just did two pluses. I can
Okay.
try 3,
Thanks.
but yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, this is good. So I was mentioning some of the code underlying the pre-computations. We have the Sentinel representative here, so we would love to see the same view for Sentinel, by the way. But let me try to go. So as I said, we have to write everything in one dialect. The dialect happens to be SQL. So I was mentioning this analysis number of providers. I don't know if I would be able to hit that one, but I think the first ones are pretty simple, so I'll try to. So I was saying that every analysis has the ID. So this is the code which pre-computes the analyses. And I was saying this is defensive SQL. Here you say cast null as varchar in order for this to run at lots of other ones. So, but you can get to all 170 like so. And let me show one more. Number of persons by payer plan period start month. So that's the inner part of the pre-computations. Let me go to the heal part, or let me keep going with the tour of what's in the GitHub. So how would you run Achilles checks? So the assumption is you have to have your data in a database. You have to be familiar with a little bit of R, and you have to know your server connection details. You have to know how you're going to get to your server. So what I'm going to talk about, I'm just going to go Achilles, and then vignette. This is a new feature. There is README and there's vignette, so you can go by both. I'm just gonna, for now, go by the vignette. So what I was talking about, you need to have your connection details. So it's gonna look something like this. What's my server, URL, port, username, and password. It's usually, in many of the SQL and Odyssey studies, it's get from system environment, so people don't disclose the details. I quite often say just source some piece of code where you have existing connection details, but you need that. And the key part, how you would run analysis, running, there we go. So the next part, with every Odyssey package, it's usually there's this key function. With the study, it's usually execute. With Achilles, it's called, the key function is Achilles. So, and there's also, if you are new to R, so you need to load the library. So let me also switch to the README, just to show that. Because I know the README, I'm a little bit more familiar with the README than the vignette. And sorry for scrolling. But this is how you would install Achilles, Odyssey, Achilles, and install GitHub. That's how you would install the latest version. If you have trouble with that, there's help how to, there is already there. I put it recently there. If you need to install the particular release, which can be helpful if you run into errors, and also if you run into some Java errors, you use this magical do not compile for 32-bit architecture, and then it works. So after you install it, then you simply run you say, well, this is my connection details, this is my database where my data is. And I was saying it does those pre-computations. So it needs to write those pre-computations somewhere. And the somewhere is called result database schema. And if you have multiple data sets and your vocabulary, you want to share one instance of OHDSI vocabulary tables, you can specify where your vocabulary schema is. But by default, it is expected in the same schema as your data is. There is, I already mentioned, to speed up, you can now run it in a multi-threaded mode. If you have Redshift, PDW, or Netezza, or the rest of us will have to stick with single-threaded, but yeah, there is and I won't try to spend too much time on it. So let me now also, you need to keep me on time. Do I have 15 more minutes, right? I hope.
We're actually eating a little bit into that time, but I think we can take some of the time that we would normally be going on to a break and just push the lunch hour a little bit later or something like that. You're okay right now.
So let me see. So we have, tell me when to end. So,
Just take another 5 to 8 minutes.
okay. So I'll try to end by 10. So I showed you Achilles, I showed you the pre-computations, I showed you how would you run it. Or show of hands, how many of you actually have ever dealt with connection details and your data? Okay, so that's good. So you would know at least. So Achilles heel, how that would work, and look into the guts of that. I was already revealing that Achilles has this knowledge base, which is used also for the developers to keep track of things, or if you get Achilles outputs, it is handy to know where things are. So I'm going to show you some of the inner side of the rules. So after I'm done with those 7 hours or 2 hours pre-computations, I either, as part of the Achilles execution, I specify, once you're done with this, proceed to Achilles heel, where the data quality checks actually occur. Or I can run it as a separate piece of code, just run Achilles heel and nothing else. And Achilles heel has, just like the pre-computations, it has some supporting CSV files, which is an overview of all the rules which Achilles heel has in itself. And each rule, just like the previous analysis, has an SQL code, because at the end of the day, everything ends up being SQL. Question?
Quick question. You said you can run Achilles heel, but you have to do the pre-comp.
Correct. It will complain, I did not find and that's actually, I was alluding to that earlier. We, as developers of Achilles heel, we had some kind of philosophical decision to make. Are all Achilles checking going to be done on the pre-computations or not? And in the past, we had things called Iris. We had things which bypassed those pre-computations. And one of the things, I should probably just devote some time to that, there is something which bypasses them as well. The check themis may bypass them. But that's a good question. So the overview of rules is there. And there are 3 knowledge bases. So let me click on the Achilles rules all. And let's just say that rule number 12 is that your diagnosis code is not in the SNOMED CT domain, and we standardize on SNOMED CT. So if you happen to put Canadian dollar as the diagnosis for John Doe on 1st of January, it will just say, sorry, Canadian dollar is not a diagnosis, and you should not have it in data. Or another example is, for example, you have 2 million patients and only 1 provider. That's suspicious. The ratio, how can 1 provider take care of 2 million patients? So your ratio of patients to providers is suspicious, and it happens to be a rule number 31. So that's a little bit quick tour. And the final plug I want to show, which I will show in the demo part, is, oh, and I should have shown you the new features, right? We can do that in the thing. The final thing I want to show is, in Achilles, some of the rules are derived from what I call the data quality study. So I'm just going to switch to a different GitHub repository. I may have it ready actually here. Study Protocol Sandbox. And in the Study Protocol Sandbox, you would notice data quality package. And this package has 4 main goals. The one I want to highlight is you can participate on data quality study. So you take your data set, you compute some measures, and you are willing to share and compare with others and drive a better improvement in data quality checking later on. You can, without sharing anything, you can simply run your data quality further checking of data quality is slightly different from HEAL. That's in the research realm. Achilles HEAL is a kind of a production level of tool, but we, as in development, we have some other things at our disposal. You can run the checks locally and not tell anyone that you did that. You're not sharing anything. It outputs something what I called your data warehouse baby UpGar score. Let's say we are all data warehouse custodians, and UpGar score is this one score, how well is your baby doing in the 1st minute, 5th minute, and 10 minute. So in an analogy, if you were truly curious, you want to know the score for your baby, I emailed it to Juan Banda at Stanford, and an email saying, I got -4. How good am I? And so we want to encourage the competition to get your baby to the best score and boost about your score. And I will demonstrate the 4th version is demonstrating the data quality checks. We have now implemented what I mentioned, this on top of Achilles. Maybe they will be soon implemented in Achilles, but there's a feature called check themes. So if you load the data quality package, and I'll demonstrate that, you can check some advanced checking. And currently this advanced checking checks for whether the units of your database, of your measurements, are conforming to a reference set, which we have put together as part of another study. I want to give a few more minutes still to Ajit to demonstrate the new fancy features.
Well, still all your time, so like 2 minutes is all it would take. But.
Sounds good. We can do that.